All right, get ready, because today
Huh.
we're going to deep dive into empathy. You know, that whole like stepping into someone else's shoes thing.
Yeah.
We're looking at this study.
Okay.
It's called Neural Empathy Mechanisms Are Shared for Physical and Social Pain and Increase from Adolescence to Older Adulthood.
Hmm.
It's from Social Cognitive and Affective Neuroscience.
Okay.
And one of the things they found, this is really interesting to me,
Yeah.
is that empathy, get this, like actually seems to peak in young adulthood, especially when we're talking about social pain.
Huh.
So that's kind of the question, like why would young adults be more, I don't know, attuned to other people's pain than like, teenagers or even older adults?
Well, it's definitely something researchers are trying to figure out. And this study, it kind of gives us some pieces of the puzzle. They compared basically how adolescents, young adults, and older adults reacted to pain.
Okay, I'm with you.
But there's a twist.
Okay, lay it on me.
They looked at two different kinds of pain, physical and social.
Ooh, okay, so break that down for me. What exactly do we mean when we say like physical versus social pain?
Okay, well, physical pain, that's the easy one.
Yeah, stub toe, paper cut, that kind of thing.
Exactly, like immediate ouch kind of pain.
Yeah.
But social pain, this is more like emotional hurt. Things like, embarrassment,
Okay.
grief, or even just feeling left out.
Ah, okay, so like the sting of rejection.
Yeah,
Exactly.
gotcha.
So how did they like measure how people react to this stuff? It's not like you can put empathy on a scale or something.
You're telling me. It's tricky, right?
Yeah.
But they used a cool combo of brain imaging
Yep.
and self-reported ratings.
Got it.
So for the brain part, they used EEG.
Okay.
That's a way to measure electrical activity in the brain.
Uh-huh.
And they basically looked at which areas lit up when people were shown images of others experiencing pain.
So like literally seeing what parts of the brain were firing when they were empathizing.
Yeah. And then to get the self-report side of things, they just asked people to rate how much pain they thought the person in the image was feeling.
Okay, so they're looking at both like the brain's response
Yeah.
and the person's own like awareness of the pain, right?
Right, exactly.
Okay, so what'd they find?
Well, the results for the young adults, pretty striking, I gotta say. They showed like the most activity in brain regions that we associate with empathy, and this was for both types of pain, physical and social. Plus, their self-reported pain ratings, boom, the highest across all the age groups.
Wow, so it's like their empathy was in overdrive.
Pretty much. But it wasn't quite that simple for the other age groups.
Oh, of course not. Research is never that straightforward.
Ever.
So what happened with the other group?
Okay, so with the older adults,
Yeah.
they actually showed increased brain activity compared to the young adults, that is.
Okay.
But here's the kicker. Their self-reported empathy scores, those were actually lower than the young adults.
Wait, hold on. So more brain activity, but less empathy they reported feeling.
Yeah. It's like, what's going on here, right?
Yeah, that seems kind of backwards, doesn't it?
It does. And that's kind of the point, right?
Okay.
Empathy, it's not just about what our brains are doing at any given moment,
Yeah, it's way more complicated than that.
Exactly.
So how do we, like, make sense of this difference? More brain activity, less reported empathy. What's the deal?
Well, the researchers have a few ideas. One is that maybe older adults are just better at, regulating their emotions.
Okay.
They might be feeling empathy just as strongly, maybe even more strongly.
Right.
But they've learned how to kind of manage it differently in a way that doesn't show up on a self-report scale.
So it's not that they're not feeling it. It's more that they've, like, developed different ways of expressing it, or maybe even just experiencing it internally.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. It's like they have this whole, library of experiences, right?
Yeah.
And that's informing how they respond to seeing pain in others.
So their experience is actually changing how they empathize.
It seems that way.
That's wild. Okay, but let's go back to the young adults for a second.
Yeah.
Why this, like, peak in empathy during those years? What's going on there?
Well, the researchers think it's probably tied to all the crazy social and emotional development happening during that time of life.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like, late teens, early 20s, you're figuring out relationships, your place in the world, you're experiencing heartbreak for the first time, maybe.
It's intense.
It's a lot.
Yeah, you're constantly learning about social dynamics, and maybe all of that intensity just primes you to be more sensitive to other people's pain.
So it's like this perfect storm of like brain development and social immersion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it really highlights how empathy isn't just this fixed thing,
Yeah.
It's dynamic, it's changing based on what we're going through.
So our brains and our experiences are kind of working together to shape how we connect with other people's emotions.
Absolutely. And this study, it's just a tiny window into how complex that process really is.
This is fascinating. Like, my whole view of empathy is kind of shifting right
Yeah,
now.
I know, right? It's pretty cool stuff.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
So what else did this study find? Like, are there any other nuggets of wisdom you can share?
Oh, there's one thing. It really jumped out at me. And I think you'll find it pretty thought-provoking too.
Oh, I'm all ears. Tell me. Tell me. What is it?
Okay, so remember how we were talking about the study focusing on like reactions to pain?
Yeah. Yeah. Physical and social pain.
Right, exactly. So the thing that kind of struck me was, well, they didn't look at how people empathize with, other emotions like, say, joy
Right.
or excitement.
Huh. Yeah, that's a good point. It makes you wonder if those responses would, like, follow the same pattern, right?
Right.
Like, would young adults be, I don't know, super tuned into someone else's joy too?
Yeah.
Or would that look different across different age groups?
Exactly, exactly. I mean, it's definitely a question worth exploring. Like, imagine if our brains lit up the same way when, like, we saw someone win the lottery as when we saw someone stub their toe,
That's a funny thought, yeah.
right? Our emotional landscape would be a mess.
Totally. And you're right, it suggests that different emotions, they probably activate different parts of our, like, empathy toolkit, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Maybe young adults are wired to be, like, more sensitive to social pain,
Hmm.
but then older adults, maybe they're better at, I don't know, sharing in someone else's happiness.
Exactly. It's like empathy has all these different flavors, and maybe we're, more sensitive to some flavors than others. And
Yeah.
it depends on, well, our age,
Okay.
our experiences.
So this research is really just scratching the surface then.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's so much more to learn about how we connect with the whole spectrum of human emotions.
This is so cool. I'm already starting to think about all the different ways empathy shows up in my own life?
Yeah.
And I'm like realizing that maybe those, especially those intense years in young adulthood, late teens, early 20s, all that, maybe that like shaped how I empathize with others.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
It is. It really is. So, but what does all this mean for us, like out there in the world, navigating like the social world?
Yeah.
Are there any like practical takeaways from this research that we can use?
I think one of the biggest takeaways is just being, more mindful of individual differences in empathy.
Okay.
Just because someone doesn't express empathy in the way we expect, it doesn't mean they're not feeling it.
That's a good point. It's easy to make assumptions.
It is. Think about those older adults in the study, right?
Yeah.
They may not have like outwardly expressed as much empathy as the young adults,
Right.
but their brains were still lighting up.
Yeah.
So it just shows how important it is to like pay attention to the subtle cues.
Mm.
Recognize that empathy can, manifest in many different ways.
So it's like we all have these like unique empathy fingerprints,
Yeah.
shaped by our brains and all the experiences we've had.
I love that, empathy fingerprints.
Yeah.
It's such a great way to put it. And like, recognizing that uniqueness, it's so crucial for, building those strong connections with other people.
So how can we like actually use this knowledge
Hmm.
to improve our interactions, like build more empathetic relationships?
I think one thing that always comes to mind for me is just like the power of open communication and active listening.
Okay. Yeah.
Really taking the time to understand where someone is coming from.
Yeah.
Even if, their perspective is different from ours, that can make a world of difference in, fostering those feelings of connection and understanding.
So meeting people where they are emotionally
Exactly.
and not expecting them to like fit into our idea of what empathy should look like.
Exactly. Exactly. And remember, empathy is a two-way street, right? It's not just about understanding other people's feelings. It's also about allowing ourselves to be vulnerable,
Yeah. Yeah.
sharing our own experiences authentically.
This has been a fantastic deep dive. Like, honestly, my whole perspective on empathy has shifted.
I know, right? It's amazing how much we're still learning about something that seems like so basic.
It is. It is. So as we wrap up, what's one final thought you want to leave our listener with?
I'd encourage everyone to like take a moment to reflect on their own journey with empathy. How has it shaped your relationships, your choices, your understanding of the world? And how can you use this knowledge to cultivate deeper connections and, more compassion in your interactions with others?
I love that, taking a moment to reflect. It's such a powerful reminder. Empathy, it's not just some concept. It's something we're always like practicing and getting better at.
It really is. It's a journey, not a destination. And the more we understand about empathy, like how it changes throughout our lives, well, maybe we can all be more compassionate, more connected.
Absolutely. And I think this deep dive, this has given us a lot to think about. It's definitely changed how I see empathy, how it shapes our lives.
I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah, it's been really eye-opening. So as we wrap up, is there anything else you want to leave our listeners with? Like one final thought about empathy?
Hmm. Well, one of the things that this research really highlighted for me is that empathy, it's not just about feeling what someone else is feeling.
Okay.
It's
Yeah.
also about, well, how we respond to those feelings. Like, can we actually be helpful and supportive?
Right, that makes sense. It's one thing to see someone's hurting, but it's another thing entirely to know how to, like, actually help them.
Exactly. And it's interesting.
Yeah.
The researchers actually found that young adults, even though they showed like the most brain activity and they reported feeling the most empathy,
Yeah.
they weren't necessarily the best at actually supporting people in distress.
Really?
Yeah.
That's kind of surprising. I mean, you'd think if you're feeling someone's pain so strongly, you'd be, I don't know, more motivated to jump in and help.
You would think so, right?
Yeah.
But it seems like there's this like disconnect
Okay.
between, feeling empathy and knowing how to act on it effectively. The researchers think that maybe young adults, well, they're really good at tuning into other people's emotions,
Hmm.
but they're still, working on those social skills, those coping mechanisms, the stuff that lets you translate empathy into action.
So it's like they have all this, like, raw empathy,
Yeah,
but they haven't quite figured out how to use it in a way that's actually helpful to the other person.
exactly. And it makes me think about how we learn these skills.
Yeah, yeah.
A lot of it's through trial and error, right? Through our own experiences of needing support, figuring out what works, what doesn't.
It's true, yeah. Yeah, I've definitely had those moments where, like, a friend's going through something tough, and I want to help, but I just don't know what to say or do.
Oh, totally. It can be so awkward even when you have the best intentions.
It really can.
And I think that's why it's so important to not just, work on our empathy,
Yeah.
but also to actually practice those skills that help us turn empathy into action.
Like what?
Well, things like learning to really listen,
Okay.
offering words of comfort, or
Yeah.
even just, being present with someone who's hurting. Sometimes that's the best thing we can do. Just let them know they're not alone.
That's so true. This has been such an amazing conversation. I'm seeing empathy in a whole new light. It's not just about feelings, it's about understanding and learning how to, like, actually make a difference.
I love that. And I think, the more we understand about empathy, the better we can be at building those compassionate, supportive relationships, the kind that really make life richer.
Absolutely. Well, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into empathy. It's been a real pleasure talking with you.
Thanks for having me. It's been great.